Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Jean-Luc and I work for a tech and travel company in Kent called Holiday Extras. At Holiday Extras I'm a software engineer, but today I'm not going to talk about software too much. I'm going to be talking about neurodiversity in tech. So when we think about diversity, we might think of things such as race or gender, and neurodiversity is just another type of diversity, and it's all about the difference in our human brains and minds. Essentially, no two brains are alike, and there's an infinite variation in our neurocognitive functioning. Neurodiversity represents this stance that our differences should be recognised and respected. So the term neurodiversity was first used to describe people with autism, and at the time, autism had lots of negative connotations, and this term brought about some positive ones. Today, it's still used to describe people with autism, but also people with dyslexia or dyspraxia or ADHD, and more commonly mental health conditions such as anxiety or depression, and people's socialising preferences, so if they're an introvert or extrovert or ambivert. The room here is far more neurodiverse than you may think as well. So 1 in 7 here will have some form of neurodivergence. I, for one, have dyslexia and dyspraxia. So at primary school, I struggled quite a lot. And I just really hated school. I was written off by my teachers. They just saw me as someone who was slow and unintelligent. My head teacher at the time even said that I wasn't an academic type, and there was no point in me even trying to take my 11 plus. I should just go to this sports specialist school because that's all I was good at, sports. But I ended up ignoring my head teacher. I got into grammar school, but still didn't get much help until about halfway through. And I think they were a little bit reluctant to give me that help because I was getting by okay, but I had more potential there. And once I started to get that help, it was like this light had switched on. All of a sudden, my marks had skyrocketed, and I began enjoying learning and went to university. The point here is that these alternate thinking styles are largely unrelated to intelligence, and having awareness about them is really important so you can get the right support, adapt and excel. So here are some more statistics for you. 1 in 10 have dyslexia, most of which are undiagnosed, so just because you haven't been diagnosed with dyslexia doesn't mean you haven't got it. Between 5 and 10% have dyspraxia, and about 4% ADHD. Autism is less common at 1 in 100 people, but some studies have shown that as many as 1 in 3 software engineers could be somewhere on the autistic spectrum. And that's thought to be because certain types of autism are characterized by a detail-oriented and highly analytical approach, which is uniquely suited to our roles as software engineers. In fact, many of these alternate thinking styles mentioned have positive abilities too, as well as coming with their difficulties. And I'm about to explain some of these in a little bit more detail, but first I want to ask you to keep an eye out if you see any of these characteristics I'm about to explain in either yourself or in one of your colleagues, because remember, many of these come undiagnosed, so you might not be aware of them yet. So let's start with dyslexia, the most common learning difficulty. So dyslexia primarily affects reading and writing skills, but there's a common misconception that it only affects reading and writing skills. It can also affect things like coordination, organisation, and memory. So reading can be a big challenge for people with dyslexia. I, for example, have never managed to read a book from start to finish. I have to constantly reread paragraphs to try and comprehend them. And writing, too, can be difficult. I often have trouble transferring my thoughts onto the paper and have to keep chopping and changing them to try and get something that makes sense. Using a computer can make this a lot easier because I have this ability to reorganize things. However, this is actually one of the reasons why I got into technology in the first place, having that ability to change things and simply just avoid using pen and paper. Here's actually an example from GCSE. So I was quite old at this point, and you can see the confusion going on in this exam paper. I'm using an asterisk because I've missed a bit out, and I'm writing down right down the side of the page. It's just a mess. And I don't know if anyone's spotted it yet, but If you have, please excuse my alternate spelling of igneous rock. And if you haven't seen it, you probably have now. I still don't know how I got the mark for this question. And if there is anyone that can't see it on screen, for whatever reason, I've spelt the word rock with a C. So people with dyslexia often have a weak working memory. And working memory is different to short and long-term memory. It has links to both. So you can think of working memory as the mental equivalent of like a scrap piece of paper, which is used to track and keep track of several bits of information. So this paper, for people with a weak working memory, is just a lot smaller than others, meaning they have less capacity to hold and manipulate that information. So also having a weak working memory means that it's more difficult to memorize what some people might think are everyday and easy things. So that could be things like the alphabet or the times tables or months of the year. And I struggled with all three of those. I was constantly in trouble for not knowing my times table at school. And at secondary school, I lost marks on exam papers because they assumed knowledge of these sorts of things that I just couldn't recall. I remember one maths paper in particular, and it was trying to assess Dijkstra's shortest path algorithm. And I knew that algorithm inside out. I'd practiced this a lot of times. But this particular question was assuming knowledge of the alphabet and the tail end of the alphabet, which was a little bit sketchy in my mind. And I ended up completely doing awful on that exam paper, well, that question in particular. And I came out so frustrated, knowing that I knew the difficult bit, the algorithm. It was the alphabet that I failed on, which is ridiculous. However, having said that, there's actually no correlation between these alternate thinking styles and intelligence. And even Albert Einstein was thought to have dyslexia, and he certainly wasn't lacking any intelligence. And there are benefits too. So we often hear that dyslexic learners are not made for the classroom, they are made for the world. And this is because they see things differently. Dyslexic learners can be really intuitive problem solvers, and they have this ability to think outside of the box. To me, coding is just solving problems, and that's why I think I get by okay. Dyslexics can also be misunderstood as daydreamers. You might see them staring out a window, or you might be in a meeting with one and they've just completely blanked whatever you were talking about. But the truth is, we just like to think, and if we're given the time to think, we will give you a really good answer. It might not be the answer that you were looking for, but we'll give you a good answer. You'll often see a lot of dyslexic people in the creative industries as either artists or designers, engineers, architects, people like Richard Branson or Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, Jamie Oliver. All these people are dyslexic and they're intrinsically creative. And that's why these people, or well, different people to those, can be a real asset to the technology industry. Computers have this brilliant ability to do the linear thinking, but in the industry we need people that can think laterally around the problem, and that's often what dyslexic learners can do. There's a really good analogy that I've heard being used to describe people with dyslexia, and it's this. The average thinker may get from A to B very quickly. It's like they're using the motorway. But the dyslexic brain is more like you're taking the scenic route. And it may take them longer to get from A to B, but think about all the things you're going to see on the way. Let's now take a look at dyspraxia, the lesser-known cousin of dyslexia. So dyspraxia is also known as developmental coordination disorder, or DCD, and it affects motor coordination. So it can also affect things like articulation or speech or perception and thought. And it's thought to be caused by a disruption in the way the brain sends messages around to different parts of your body. So motor coordination difficulties, which underlie dyspraxia, can be gross or fine. So gross movements are your larger movements, so things like running and walking. So people with these difficulties may have difficulties with balance. You can also have fine motor coordination difficulties, which are found in more delicate aspects like writing or painting. You all saw my handwriting earlier, and that's due to a fine motor coordination difficulty. I'm also very accident prone. I'm a tripper, I'm a dropper, I've already spilt water over 2 people today. And last year I even ended up in hospital from doing the washing up. Speech can also be very difficult, so people with dyspraxia might have difficult pronouncing words or converting their thoughts into speech. And they may also experience difficulties with perception. So this is all to do with the interpretation of the senses, and people might be over or undersensitive to light or noise or distinguishing noises from the background. They may also be over or undersensitive to touch, taste, smell, temperature or pain, and they can also experience similar memory issues to people with dyslexia. People with dyspraxia may experience failure more often when doing trivial tasks compared to others, and as dyspraxia is a lifelong condition, these are experienced right throughout their life. And this may sound like a difficulty or a disadvantage of being dyspraxic, but having these failures can actually make someone that's a lot more determined and motivated and hardworking, and these are common characteristics found in people with dyspraxia. As with dyslexic learners, they have a really good ability to think outside of the box, and they're intrinsically creative. And they also have a wicked sense of humour because they've learned to make light of their difficulties and failures over time. I'm now going to move on to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So ADHD is a genetic behavioural condition which causes symptoms in 2 categories. So you've got inattentiveness and hyperactivity and impulsiveness. You can have symptoms in just one or both of these categories. And research has shown that it's caused by the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is responsible for our executive functions. While some children will outgrow their ADHD, it's still very prevalent in adults, with about 60% retaining it. As I mentioned, one of the categories of symptoms is inattentiveness. So this means people may not listen or carry out instructions as they should, and they might struggle organising tasks or change tasks often. And they can also be the masters of procrastination. In terms of hyperactivity and impulsiveness, these people might find listening to people very difficult, or they might finish off people's sentences for them, or more generally just be impatient or frustrated. They can also be very restless and edgy, which might cause them to fidget and just not being able to sit still. They might also do things in the spur of the moment without properly thinking through the actions, which can sometimes get them in trouble. Despite these difficulties, they can have some amazing superpowers too. So hyperfocus is one of these. Hyperfocus is the ability to focus all of that attention, all of that energy into one task, which makes them incredibly productive at that task. So that might be coding or reading or something like that they can do for hours and hours on end and make incredible progress. There's many successful writers and artists and scientists who have leveraged the power of hyperfocus. And people with ADHD have a real resilience and inventive streak too. It was thought that Thomas Edison, who was the inventor of the light bulb, had ADHD. And he wasn't just the inventor of the light bulb, he was a serial inventor. It took him 3,000 attempts before he made the first functioning light bulb, and this was due to his resilience. He wouldn't give up. They're also known to take risks and do things that are a little spontaneous, which others might be too afraid to do. And again, that might sound like a difficulty, or that might cause problems, but at times having that ability to be a bit spontaneous and do something that people are afraid of can be a positive. It's often not quiet around someone who has ADHD as well, and you can often get really engaging conversations from them. They are probably not going to be very quiet in a room of people. Let's now take a look at autism. So autism is a lifelong developmental disability which affects how you communicate and relate to others, and also make sense of the world. So you may have heard of Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism, and people with Asperger's syndrome tend to have fewer problems with speech and are of average or above average intelligence. They still have problems with understanding and processing language though. So people with autism may struggle with socializing. That can be quite difficult, and they can take things very literally, which means they might miss jokes or sarcasm or find it difficult to understand facial expressions, for example. They might also not be able to judge the tone of voice, either theirs or someone else's. And some people with autism may not speak at all or have very limited speech, and they might prefer alternative communication methods, such as using visual symbols or sign language. They may find reading people or understanding someone else's feelings very difficult too. They might also not understand someone's intentions when they're doing something. And as a result, they can sometimes come across insensitive or socially inappropriate. And these difficulties have a knock-on effect of causing problems forming relationships or friendships. Routines can be very important to people with autism. So let's be honest, the world is an unpredictable place. And people with autism often like to stick to their daily routine and know exactly what they're having for lunch that day and exactly how it's made. They might like to sit in the exact same seat, or all these different things that they like to do very specifically. They can have highly focused interests too. That might be art or astronomy or computers. And these interests can be intense and last a lifetime, or equally they can also evolve over time. Computers can be a particular interest, and that's because they're ubiquitous, and there's no need to navigate the social challenges that's involved in many other activities. They may experience the similar sensory sensitivities as people with dyspraxia as well, which again can cause a level of anxiety. However, there can be benefits too. They often have a lot of passion to put into these interests that I spoke about. It can make them highly motivated, and they're often tuned very acutely into the detail, which means they can identify patterns and trends which may seem impossible for a human to identify. And that can make them great cybersecurity analysts, for example. The truth is the truth for people with autism as well. They're unlikely to tell any white lies, and this can actually make it easier to communicate with them because you'll get the truth from them. Likewise, they often don't judge people like others are more accustomed to sometimes. And again, that can make really good communication and positive relationships with them. So we've now finished looking at the most common alternate thinking styles. Let's take a look at neurodiversity in the workplace. So in recent years, there's been a growing body of academic research that suggests neurodiversity has tangible benefits for businesses. Yet historically, recruitment processes have created barriers for the neurodiverse workforce. And companies are just not prioritizing neurodiversity in their diversity and inclusion efforts. As you can see on the graph behind me, disability is well down on the list. People who are neurodivergent are more likely to be unemployed and underemployed, which means they're working below their skill level. And according to research from the National Autistic Society, just 16% of autistic adults are in full-time work, despite 77% of those wanting to be in full-time work. And this is all despite the strengths that they have to offer. However, there's a growing number of big firms who are looking to access this neurodiverse talent. Here are just a few examples. We've got the BBC up on here, Microsoft, IBM, HSBC, and there's more. Businesses want their workforces to be representative of the 1 billion people worldwide who have a disability, and it means that they'll be building better products and better services, better websites, which better represent the people using them. One initiative I think is great is from SAP, the global software company. So SAP started an Autism at Work program about 6 years ago, and they hired 140 people with autism and have a goal of 1% of their workforce, which is around 650 people. Some of whom they hired had really struggled to get a job. They might have graduated in a degree in computer science, for example, and gone a year without employment. So they were taking chances on these people. And the program includes a one-month screening process, an interview process, involving some unconventional assessment methods. So things like building Lego robots, which you can see on screen, according to a highly detailed set of instructions, which is more going to help these people succeed. Some candidates do better walking and talking, so they take strolls around the campus, for example. Or some prefer to have discussions in larger groups, or smaller groups, or one-on-one, and they did what it takes to get the best out of the candidates. They also supported them with extra coaching, sent them on training sessions to develop their social skills, and they made workplace adjustments where necessary, for example, fitting a canopy over Michael's desk here, just to provide some relief from the fluorescent lights that are common in office places. Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard both have similar programs to these. There's others, there's a growing number. What can we do? First off, educate yourself and your team about neurodiversity and why it's beneficial. If people are around neurodivergent colleagues and aren't aware, then our differences in communication styles and thinking styles is going to cause them to assert unconscious biases on them. Awareness is key. Getting to know your colleagues is really important so you can understand their difficulties and needs. That means we can make adaptations where needed, and that could be, for example, encouraging someone to contribute in a meeting because they find speaking up difficult, or not pressuring someone to go to that office party because those loud situations with lots of flashing lights are just not for them. We also need to think about the recruitment process. So traditional recruitment methods can be to focus on a candidate's social skills or ability to fit in culturally rather than their skills to do the job. Practical methods like work trials are great at bypassing these barriers. Being flexible and helping the candidate show the best versions of themselves is the most important thing here. So we need to be mindful of our wider impact in our day-to-day job too. So we should be ensuring our websites are accessible. I'm sure many people here are trying to push for that. That includes the markup, the design, content, products will work well with neurodivergent users. So focusing in on that last point about designing products for neurodivergent users, I want to share with you my top 5 design tips for doing just that. So number 1, avoid overloading the UI. Keeping a clean interface free of pop-ups and compacted information helps people avoid that cognitive overload that we want to avoid and that they might find just too overwhelming. A common excuse for adding things like this is, well, the legal team made me put it there, or the product manager made me put it there. You have to do your best to push back in these scenarios. I know it's difficult, I've experienced it. It's very important, and take the battle on, head on. So for each of these tips, I've got some examples to help illustrate them. I'll try and describe them if anyone can't see them up on screen. And I just want to say this is not a finger-pointing exercise. I've tried my best to remove the organisation's names. You might still recognise the UIs. It's nothing against them in particular. It's just, this is commonplace in the industry, so it really is not against them. So these 2 examples both suffer from overloaded UIs. The one on the left has lots of different sections and functionality all condensed into a small mobile device here. On that one screen, you've got a cookie banner, you've got some search functionality, you've got some ratings, you've got multiple buttons to initiate a chat, and you've got 3 buttons to initiate a product comparison of some sorts. It's just unnecessary. And the example on the right is showing 3 pop-ups all at once, which again is unnecessary when people just want to read the article, which is in that tiny gap between the pop-ups. And these are hurdles that the users just shouldn't have to jump through. So this one is massive for me, segmenting content. If I see 3 paragraphs of text not broken down on an article, whether it's online or on paper, I simply won't read them. It's a subconscious thing. It's not something I do on purpose in spite of the people that have written that. It's a subconscious thing. So we need to break up blocks of text for people to help them consume it. And there's lots of techniques for doing that, and there's some of these on this slide. So this example, I've just come up with it. The example on the left, which is the better version, makes use of bold text, lead text. There's some strategic subheadings in there. It uses block quotes, all nicely formatted to give lots of space around different sections and segments on the page. You can also use images, iconography, they're great as well, breaking up your text. And the difference to the one on the right that I described with just the big blocks of text is huge and makes it so much easier to consume. Number 3, reduce urgency. So persuasive messaging and timed transactions can cause this sense of urgency, which is just detrimental to users. As mentioned before, some people need that time to complete the actions and make those decisions. They just need the time. Others can experience anxiety or upset from the pressure as asserted by the messaging or the timer ticking down, timer of death. And businesses will claim these sort of practices are required, and there's a very small edge case that they really are actually required. But this kind of practice can definitely be reduced. So we've all seen examples like this before, messages that say, you've got 10 minutes to complete this purchase, or that a product has been booked 20 times in the last 2 hours, so you really need to get it now. Or using the red, all of these are using the colour red, which adds to the danger and urgency of not booking these things. And the example on the right, every single hotel here is all in high demand, apparently, miraculously, for that company. So number 4, tolerate errors. However intuitive or however many designers you've got working on your UI, however slick it is and proud of it you are, users are going to make mistakes. That could be just pressing the wrong button. They might be using a mobile, or they might have motor coordination difficulties, or they might just put the old address on their delivery order. It should be possible to reverse these mistakes without penalty and without difficulty, and on the platform they're using. So it doesn't mean, well, you can ring our call center if you've got an issue. Some people don't like talking on the phone. Let them use the platform they're using, give them the option to reverse the mistakes. These are 2 great examples of this. So we've got Google Mail, which when you send an email, it's really smart. It doesn't actually send the email until a couple of seconds later. So it gives you the opportunity to undo sending that action. On Amazon, you can edit the delivery address. I've done this so many times. And after you've placed your order, you can also cancel the order before it's been dispatched, which again, it's really useful. You've ordered the wrong product, for example, a slight variation. These things are perfect for people that will make mistakes, and that is all of us at times. So number 5, reduce motion. So don't autoplay your videos, just don't do that. So the user can choose when and if they want to play that video. Avoid excessive animations. Some users can find them distressing, or it can just be a cause to leave. Parallax scrolling as well is just a typical example. It's an optical illusion which gives this sense of depth, and it too can cause unease. So much so, when Apple introduced parallax backgrounds in iOS 7, they were inundated by requests to limit that motion, hence the feature that came along to reduce that motion on your mobile phone that you may have seen now. And there's plenty more examples of excessive animations. I just didn't want to include them on here because I'm telling you to reduce those excessive animations. So these are my top 5 design tips for neurodivergent users. I did struggle to get it down to 5. There's plenty more. Please help share the word and challenge people to consider these things. You will always be designing for a neurodivergent audience, so remember that. If you would like to identify neurodiverse traits in yourself, then you can visit this link. I can share it around afterwards or give it to you in person afterwards. Just come and see me. The test that is at this link has been through multiple revisions, and there's been a lot of research that's gone into that. And it has 121 questions. It sounds a lot, but it shouldn't take 15, 20 minutes or so to complete. And when you complete it, you get one of these cool spider web graphs. Maybe everyone doesn't think it's as cool as me. I'm just a bit lame. But it gives you a PDF document with all the results, and it does a really good job of explaining those results. So the results that you get from them, ultimately, they're still going to be a bit primitive. It's not going to solve your life's problems, but it might just give you this awareness, which is really important because it will help you develop coping mechanisms and just make your life easier. Just try to become aware of these things, either yourself or people around you. Thank you all for listening. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc.
Thank you.
Any questions in the audience? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
On the recruitment side of things with the workplace, is it something where people should be very upfront about the neurodiversity that they may have? Is this something you need to sort of declare up front, or is it where you wait till you got the job and then you sort of pass it on? I'm not too sure, and kind of where I'd also, if you could just clarify between where it's something that could well affect your job and the way that you work, or where it's a sort of side effect and not maybe related directly to your work.
Okay, so in terms of recruitment, there's two sides to it. So if there's someone here, for example, going for a job, definitely be upfront about it. But also, you need to keep in mind, if you're in charge of recruitment, that you need to have that ability to try and get those details out of people. So on your recruitment pages, for example, you might need to have a field to try and get those details out of people. But you have to be aware that people also might just not be aware. They might be undiagnosed, or they might not want to give you that information for whatever reason. So on the recruitment, if you're doing interviews or assessment days or something like that, you have to be aware of it again, and just give people as much opportunity as possible to declare those things and ask them questions about anything that could get that information out of them. And what was the second part of your question? I've forgotten it.
Well, it was just in terms of whether it directly affects their work or not.
So in terms of if it affects their work, well, organisations have to make adjustments for people, so they can't, if it's going to take someone a bit longer to do a certain job, they have to make adjustments. It's part of the law, so companies should be aware of those things, and if they're not, then you need to remind them that it's their responsibility to make adjustments, whatever that may be, if that's fitting a canopy over Michael's desk, for example, or letting someone sit at the same desk each day. Those things they have to do.
Thank you.
Any more in the audience?
There's a couple at the front.
Hello, thank you for such a great talk. You mentioned that your list of top 5 was difficult to keep it to 5.
Yes.
I'm really interested in the long list.
See.
I have got it on another page here, but if I touch this, it's all going to go. Okay. So see me at the end, and I'll get it out, and we can have a look at it.
Thank you.
Because I won't remember them off the top of my head.
There's one over here, mate.
Hi, you described me in everything.
Yeah.
And I do struggle at work because they always have an issue with my dyslexia.
Right.
Are there any tools that you use in particular that help you?
I use quite a lot, and I've tried quite a lot as well. So Grammarly is like the saviour for me in terms of spelling. Even though my spelling's not as bad, it's not one of my weaknesses, it's a saviour, I think, for anyone. So if you haven't got that, they've got like Chrome extensions and everything. So Grammarly, I used text to, I always get this muddled up, text to speech, yes, that way around. Software, sometimes if there's an article that I really want to read, but it's too verbose for me to look at it, I will use that sometimes, and that's built in to macOS, so that's good. What other tools? I did try Dyslexia. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a special font that you can install, and they have a Chrome plugin for it as well. So Dyslexia is a special font that's been designed for dyslexics, and it's a little bit like Comic Sans, and you might smirk at that, but Comic Sans is notoriously good for people with dyslexia, and it's very similar. Each character is very different, so you don't struggle to identify the differences between the characters. So it might be worth giving that a go.
Okay. Anyone else? Just because I've already. Is that all right? Have I given it to you once already?
It's not a question, it's just
Okay, I'll give it to you in a second, if that's right.
Hi, that was a very good, interesting presentation.
Good, thank you.
The question I've got is, you know the link about people doing assessment?
Yeah.
Is that a free link or is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I've no ties with that or anything. So I think a lot of it has been constructed from like a lot of public research and stuff. So
And the report it produces is free as well. You said a PDF.
Yeah, it's all free. You get results you get a results page, and you can download that in PDF format afterwards. It's all free, so give it a go.
Well done with the presentation.
Thank you very much.
This isn't a question, it was just to add to the list of software. I don't have dyslexia, but I need to tweak the colours I use on the screen. I use an extension which is really badly written called K or Rise, which allows you to change the background and foreground colours of everything, which might be helpful. You can also use Claro Read and Claro View, but I think those cost money.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Did you have another question? There's no one else? No? Okay, there's one comment on Slido, not a question. Note that Asperger's is now grouped with autistic spectrum disorder and not its own diagnosis. Of course, many folks do still self-describe as having Asperger's.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Unless there's any more in the room, I think that's it, mate.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, mate.